Hi, and welcome to Live with OAIB, a conversation where we discuss critical HR challenges that leaders are facing today. We use our 40 plus years of experience in HR, consulting, and executive coaching to go deep on the topics that are top of mind but often avoided. Thanks for joining us today. Now, it's third Tuesday, so that means that we have PDC credits available with today's live. OAIB is approved by SHRM for professional development credits, or PDCs, for the SHRM certification program or for the SHRM CP and the SHRM SCP attendees. Attendees must view the presentation in its entirety, receive the SHRM activity code. Hello, everyone. I'm with Tanya Roberts, COO, Executive Coach, and Human Capital Strategist. I'm the integrator in the group who takes a holistic approach to turn your vision for the organization or yourself into solutions that create cultures where all not only feel but know they belong and can thrive. My superpower has been my ability to help my clients articulate their needs and goals and then break them down into actionable steps that don't overwhelm them. Tawana, over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tawana Bagwad. I am the CEO and Principal Consultant for OAIB. I am a visionary who believes in the power and promise of equity. I help organizations become places where everyone has a deep sense of belonging. I cut through the background noise and coach individuals and groups, but especially leaders, to make a mindset shift, starting with themselves, being their authentic self, aligning with their purpose, and being rooted in their own personal power. I would say my superpower is helping people become aware of their blind spots so that they can put the oxygen mask on themselves first. You all know that's my favorite. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then make others feel safe, heard, and inspired. Okay, Latanya, how about you introduce today's topic?
All right. Now, before I do that, remember if you're joining us live, we want to hear from you. So go ahead and drop your questions below or comments. We like to bring you into the conversation. So let's get into it. We are all familiar with mentoring in the traditional sense, right? This person is typically more experienced and often more seasoned, but not as many people are actually familiar with what reverse mentoring is and why it can be such a powerful tool in developing staff at all levels within your organization. And more importantly, why now is the time to make it a part of how you do work. So, Tawana, why is mentoring so important to organizations and their people? And how have companies used this to develop their staff?
Yeah, it is so important for us to lay a foundation, right? Because mentoring is important. In a nutshell, it helps organization retain their best talent. There's a direct correlation between job satisfaction and retention. I would tell you that it's so important by investing in your people, you create a culture of high performers. Their eagerness for continuous growth, and they thrive in the organization. But remember, mentoring is so much more than a professional favor or act of altruism. It's direct investment in the future of your company. I would say traditional mentoring programs are more and more commonly used to develop skills, to share knowledge, to break down silos, and support diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Absolutely. Now, we're always talking about the differences in our workforce, right? From generations to preferences and what have you. And over the last 10 years or so, I would say these differences have really been highlighted. So, Tawana, how does today's workforce differ from, let's say, about 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, we talked this in one of our lives that there are four generations in the workforce today, and all have a working style that has been influenced by the time, right? The culture, the beliefs, media, technology, politics, right? And most importantly, life experiences. This has forced leaders to evolve into their style, but to also demand them to think about it from a more human centric. And this
Mhm.
approach is for managers to think about these younger generations and how they can connect with them in a way that will have them to be comfortable bringing their authentic self, one. And then two, make this a place where they feel they belong because managers understand that their style may be different, but yet and still they're able to get the results. I would tell you the other thing is even though Gen Z has been in the workforce for 11 years, if we start at age 18, right? One challenge we consistently hear from people is that they do not know how to work with them. They just are like, it's a different mindset that they have. It's sometimes challenging to their style. And I would tell you, in other words, they are sometimes unwilling to adapt how they work in order to accept and embrace the diversity in working styles of this generation. So, one concept that we have seen worked well is reverse mentoring. That's why it's so important for us to bring this concept alive to you today.
Thank you for that. Now, when we think about mentoring, that's one thing, and we already explained what that is, but what is reverse mentoring?
So, I would tell you reverse mentoring is when a more junior employee mentors someone more senior than them in this layman's term, right? The idea that a junior employee can share their experience. And most times it's around technology or digital media, but I don't want it to come across as that these are just, limiting to technology and
Mhm.
media, right? With the senior colleagues who may be less familiar with these areas. And as you well know, technology is moving by light years. And I would tell you that most senior leaders aren't taking a technology class to keep up, but they should be surrounding themselves with people who it naturally come to. And to be quite honest, that is our younger or junior leaders in the organization.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we have a blog that can accompany today's talk. So, in that blog, Reverse Mentoring opens the doors for change. You encourage readers to create a board of youth advisors. What does that look like?
So this is really cool, right? Because I initially have been thinking about how can we get leaders to embrace having more young or youthful leaders advise them. So I wouldn't necessarily tell you that reverse mentoring is new, but what I will tell you is that I don't feel that everyone has embraced the power that it can bring. So
Mhm.
I would tell you that it's a select group of individuals from the Millennial and Gen Z population, right, in your organization that already possess some strong leadership qualities and are unafraid to challenge status quos and think outside the box, but not only willing to point out opportunities and gaps and issues or problems, but have some thoughts about ways to close those gaps, to strengthen the opportunity areas, or even to eliminate problems with short and long term systemic strategies, actions, and solutions. But more importantly, they are leading the change with their sleeves rolled up. Because the last thing we need is for someone to say, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, with no solutions, right?
Mhm.
And then aren't willing to jump in to try to make a difference or impact change.
Absolutely. And one way that I've used reverse mentoring working in another organization was actually to set up a panel
Mm.
where we pulled some of the more junior levels in to talk about what has been their experience and how can they improve. So Twana, tell me, what are some of those benefits of having this committee before we get into kind of the how to's of what this could look like?
So in the blog, I call them a board, but I have shifted my perspective to committee. And I just wanted to get in alignment with that, right? Because when I think about a board, it is a decision making body, right? That has authority over a person or group versus the committee is a group of individuals that have experience, perspective, or expertise on a given topic or area. And this should be the mindset that we would expect for our um, junior advisory committee
Mhm.
to want to play in. So on the slide, we have some benefits of what that could potentially look like, right? So when we think about leader to mentor benefit, I would say they gain a fresh perspective on trends, right? Young junior leaders, they keep up on the trends, whether they're internal to the organization or external, all feeding into how a leader could have their perspective on decision making, right? They create a deeper connection with their team members and they become more relatable, right? Sometimes the gap between our junior leaders and our senior leaders are not just a physical gap that is by hierarchy and levels, but sometimes the leaders are so removed because their job description will require them to work a bit more external than internal to the organization. This is an opportunity for them to obtain insight into the roles, unique perspectives, and experiences of junior staff. Like, how are the junior staff feeling about the changes that we are having? We created these roles, the senior leaders approve them, but they really don't have a good feel for how that's being rolled out or impacting, right? It enabled them to adopt to change and new tools could be new, as we talked about, technology coming out that the organization as a whole has adopted, but have the new leaders really played into that technology or really have an understanding of how it would impact the end users? And of course, we know that the leaders are getting a report on these things, and no one wants to bring bad news unless it really is bad news and there needs to be a change. But I would say that for someone that has coached people to give leadership update, we typically come with a balanced view and a plan for when we see that. There's a level of building respect and trust from both sides, right? And then we also get an opportunity for leaders to learn about unintentional consequences of future actions or change before they actually implement. And this one is so key because if we can get the reactions before implementation, that saves us on the back end around rework, around, to be quite honest, hurt feelings or offense or people not understanding or feeling included, and it also begins to shift your culture, right? And I would say there's always a mutual acceptance and trust that both sides should look forward to. Now, as we go to the next slide and we talk about there's some benefits on the, flip side for the junior advisors, right? So they're getting also coach, right? And so they're acquiring leadership skills. So there's an upskill that's occurring here. They're building confidence when communicating with leadership and senior clients. That is, worth a million, as you well know. Everyone don't get an opportunity to get that level of exposure. That's just real and how it is. They're developing trusting relationships because typically when you're in a mentoring relationship, you are learning about personal things as well about the individual. You're learning about their strengths. So you're coaching from both perspective. And that tends to have relationships that go beyond sometimes work or just beyond the partnership that you may have in that moment in time. They're sharing knowledge and innovative ways of doing work. And it feels more organic because I'm not trying to get time on your calendar and fit in with a particular project, but there is agenda items that you're discussing on a collective. And this allows you an opportunity to share ideas on how to improve the experience of not just you as an individual, but also for the team and ultimately the organization. So, as we think about how we could benefit, I would tell you that your junior advisory committee can provide deep insight in unlocking keys to the culture, innovation, and competitiveness, right? Wouldn't you like to know what the next generation of your organization managers and leaders think about? So here's some questions that I would ask you to imagine if you had a junior advisory committee. Could you pose questions to them about what could make our culture better, right? We ask that question in general, but wouldn't it be really cool to understand what the next generation of leaders are thinking? Um, What would make this company a place I would refer my friends to? This is so important, right? We can take input from different levels of the organization, but to have someone that is junior in the organization that will tell you the truth, right? And be honest with you around why they would or would not recommend their friends. And if there's something tangible there that we can make a change, that will automatically start to benefit our current employees and those that would come into the organization. What would make this company a destination employer for young talent? That one really excites me, right? Because as I think about where I am in my career and being able to pass the baton, as many leaders should be thinking about, that will require us to start to think about grooming, right? That will have us to start to think about what succession look like, and not just from a skill set, but from style, right? From approach, from personality. And then what biases do we see that I don't perceive to be real in our organization? And those are blind spots, and we all have them. So to be able to have our junior leaders to be able to say, this shows up this way. This is how my generation that will move from, Z will now replace X, and millennials will replace Z, and then we'll get the next in as the baby boomers and the Gen X begin to retire. So we want to hopefully expose as many biases as we can so that our culture has already built in and ingrained how we deal with diversity, inclusion, and equity. So these are biases that we can talk about from a past perspective. We used to do that. We used to have these opportunities, and now they're gone because we put in the work.
Absolutely. You touched on so many things that I want to make sure that people are really picking up on. And if you're watching us live right now, go ahead and add some other benefits and or questions that you want to hear about as you're going into these relationships. When you talk about getting the unexpected information or reactions from people as you start to roll out new initiatives or take new actions, some things came to mind about all the changes that came about at the start of the pandemic, right? We shut
Mhm.
down overnight. All
Yeah.
of a sudden, you had to do remote work. You had to figure out how to reconnect with people. And then, I come from the consulting world. It was like, well, in consulting, you have to do business development work, you have to do client work, right? And a lot of those responsibilities lay with certain roles. Well, in order to create this work-life harmony here, sometimes some of those responsibilities were taken away from the more junior staff so they could,
Mhm.
figure out what life meant. But in return, the more seasoned staff took on those responsibilities. So there was a lot of feedback amongst that particular group of, well, what do we do now?
Mhm.
Because you've changed up our operating model,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, there wasn't enough information that came back from that particular group, those that were impacted, right? And it would have been amazing for this group to have been involved in that particular next step that directly affected them. The other thing was, in this last slide, we're talking about questions. Imagine if you had the answers to some of these questions here.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about reverse mentoring, and typically we look at the senior leaders here, but hello, HR staff, hiring managers,
Yeah.
people that are involved in the recruiting process.
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be great if you all had these answers too? Right. So, some of these same questions and these same tactics definitely apply across whatever your job may be. Because
That's
at the end of the day, you need to be thinking about your junior staff, your next level leaders, as those are your clients. Those are your customers, whether you're in consulting or in some other field. Their views, their needs, their wants matter because they're the ones that get the job done. And a lot of times they're the ones that are interacting with their customers, right? So we want to make sure that they're happy and they're taken care of in this process too. So take a really hard look at those questions that were just up and say, hey, how can this also apply outside of a reverse mentoring situation? But where else can we use it across the work that we do here and how we interact with our people?
such great points. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
lifting that because
Yeah.
I do believe that it's so important that all voices be amplified, right? And that is one
Mhm.
of the messages that we're trying to put forward as we do these lives. So as we're focusing today on reverse mentoring, that is not negating that we're, promoting. You can't make a decision without consensus or checking with the advisory committee or that, but we are suggesting that we don't leave any level
Mhm.
organization out and that everyone has something of value to contribute. And if we don't get that right, given that these two populations in particular, the millennials and the Gen Z, are growing, every year,
Mhm.
and they are our future. So let's not miss opportunity to begin to invest in them now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And bring them in. I think about it from a change manager perspective. You want to get people along, bought into the process early on, right? Some of those that are very forward thinking and ready to lean in and offer their advice, that's who you want to bring in here. But then also think about those that are a little bit quieter, but they do the work and
Mhm.
they have something to contribute to the conversation. Be intentional about who you select to be a part of your junior advisory committee, because sometimes we just need someone to say, hey, I see you. I know
Mhm.
you have something to give here. I want to hear what you have to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you think about, results, right? We're always thinking about, okay, everything we do is an investment, whether it's a financial investment, a time investment, et cetera. And we're always reprioritizing. There has to be some type of return on this investment.
Absolutely.
What are some of the results you've seen in reverse mentoring when it's truly embraced within an organization?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is both the junior leader and the senior leader grow and they expand their perspective on business, on the culture, and the overall organization. They understand their role to influence and have impact, and they become more effective change agents, which you mentioned earlier about change management. I would say their culture shifts and it becomes more of a caring, considerate, inclusive, right? Culture where people want to be there, right? That's that sense of belonging, because I can bring my authentic self. We've seen organization decision making process has become more inclusive as well. Their communication is open, right? So you hear people saying, we just want more transparent, open, honest communication, right? So, what does that begin to look like when people start to feel that they are a part of, right? And not an afterthought. And when leaders understand that more and more of not just Gen Z and millennials want that, everyone wants it. And I would also tell you that there is a focus on growth, development, and a vested interest in all the people in the organization because the junior leaders actually require that. They're actually very thirsty for to be a part of seeing change happen. And their influences are very different from those other generations, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just a new reality that we living in. And most times there's also a shift in diversity, right? The landscape of the diversity shift. It shifts from a not just a ethnicity or race. There's a shift in thinking. There's a shift in approach, right? Where all become included in a way that it shows up as valuing and people feel that they are a part of something big.
Absolutely. One of our viewers says ROI on time investment is my top priority at the moment. Good way to describe ROI beyond just financial. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So true. I
Well,
purposely stayed away from it, by the way. So thank you for picking that up.
yeah. No problem. The last thing you mentioned here about the shift in diversity landscape
Mm,
makes me think about one topic that's really coming up in our industry is sustainability and DEI,
yeah, yeah.
right? We have to make sure that, DEI isn't just a thing that popped up 2.5, 3 years ago because what happened. This is something that should be embedded. We always talk about DEI should be part of your DNA, it's part of your
Mhm.
culture, right? It's not separate from your way of operating. When we think about sustainability, the conversation is really about introducing those diverse mindsets, those diverse skill sets across the globe, because we are international, operating in 27 plus countries. So we're
Woo!
hearing, I just had to throw that out there because
Yes,
DEI doesn't just impact us here in the US.
that's
And
right.
those issues that impact us here are different when we go across the pond, we go to the other side of the world, wherever you may be. But sustainability, whether that's in business or you think about social impact, you think
Mhm.
about our environment, that's a word that transcends across all things. And if we continue to go in with the same mindset and don't leverage the diverse skill set, the diverse thought processes, we can't get there, right? And we create so much more harm than we can do good here. So, thinking about that as you're starting any new program, especially a mentoring program, there is a two-way street here, and there's a lot more connections across your business than what you think there are. And we've talked a lot about, what's the ROI, what are the benefits, and why you should do reverse mentoring or start some type of program, right? Whether it's a formal program or doing something like the panels or even focus groups. But there's also some things that you need to watch out for, right? Like there's good, but there's some things that could happen, and we have to make sure that we are aware of those watch outs as we're starting anything new, so that we can go in and mitigate some of those risks. So, Tawana, what are some of those watch outs that we should think about when we're actually developing and implementing a reverse mentoring program?
Yeah, with everything that we do, right? There's always a risk of us going extreme, or there's an interpretation, right? So for the leaders, I would say they should show up as being open, right? But sometimes they're really not. So, like, this is a great program. I want to be here and participate. And then when suggestions come up, they could very well be defensive, or, they override in a way that they're flexing their position and power and authority, and may not be as conscious of it, or they have a response that shows up as a rebuttal or an excuse when new ideas are being shared. They could use their role to influence the desired outcome and push their agenda. And that one, I can tell you that we hear quite a bit. And the junior leaders interpret that as not really wanting them to be an advisor to them. And there's some offense that occurs there, or they're using the junior advisor for a show or to check the box, right? Versus really looking for influence and transformation to occur by being open and listening actively, and then really taking into consideration what is being put forth, so that it shows up more as a collaboration, right? As a partnership, versus the senior leader know better, or the junior leader don't have all the information. One of the other things that we've seen is then the extreme of becoming overly dependent on the advisors before making certain decisions, right? That could affect their peer group. So we want to be open to hearing. But at the end of the day, you still are the leader. And yes, you do have the ultimate decision right to decide what will or will not occur in the organization, but we don't want it to come across as wasting, right, the juniors' time, or yours for that matter, junior leaders, because we are in show or checking the box. There's not very genuine. They show up as not very genuine. We've also heard that as well. Now, when I think about the junior advisors, right? They also have to be aware that you have limited perspective. So sometimes the leader may not be defensive, even though you may be translating as so, because there's more data that may not be available to you. So there is a balance, right, that needs to be taken into consideration around how much information are you sharing, senior leaders, in order to put the junior leaders' perspective or perception of something in its proper place so they can advise accordingly. Or also, junior leaders should watch out from not using this as a platform to brag, right? But to really affect change. Or using your connections to influence for a personal agenda. Like, I'm joining this committee because I want to get promoted. You could very well do that coming out of such an assignment or being part of a committee, but your going in agenda should be that this is an opportunity for you to provide insights and perspectives that maybe the leaders don't have, that could have them to make better decision making choices or outcomes for the organization. Also, be willing to push back with a sound why. So, some junior advisors may be uncomfortable with pushing back because they could be concerned about losing their job or how they may come across. And so, you should feel that it's okay to push back and also be very clean on your why. You should ask lots of questions and always try to understand the big picture so that when you are giving feedback, that it's in perspective. And never lose perspective of the bigger picture, right? At the end of the day, there is a overall organization and company that needs to be ran, and there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration. I think one of the things that was missing here that I've heard on many occasions is that sometimes when these advisory committees are put in place, there's an extra sensitivity, right, on both ends, by the way, where the leader sometimes would say, I can't be myself with them, Tawana, because I would tell my more senior leaders, no, we're not doing that. And here's why, and we'll move on. But I'm concerned that if I were to approach it that way, that they could have hurt feelings or I would offend. So there is sometimes when you talk about bringing your authentic self, that the senior leaders feel that they can't because they don't want to hurt feelings. And I always say to them, that is part of the process, right? That is learning different styles. Our junior leaders will have a style that they will bring, and senior leaders have a style that they will bring. So, what's super important is that everyone has to be trained before we even start this process on what to expect. There needs to be some clear objectives and goals. I'm jumping to the next slide. So let me stop there. So there are watch outs on both sides. I got
There are, and before we get into that next thing, the expectations, communications is one thing that's so important,
colorful.
right? And I will say to that last point of, hey, they may be a little sensitive or they may not be able to take me, I say at 100%. Right?
Right.
When I'm communicating, I may be a little bit more direct when I'm talking to my other leaders. Well, who's to say your junior staff aren't just as direct when they're talking to their peers, right? But the important thing here is whoever you're communicating with, you have to adapt to their style.
Mhm.
You have to practice that platinum rule, not the golden rule here. Treat people how you want to be treated. Well, hey, I like a little sugar on my message, and sometimes I want you to give it to me straight, no chaser. But a good leader or a good communicator knows how to be that chameleon or that unicorn and shift a little bit to adapt to the person that they're communicating with. Leader, you may be surprised that that person likes that straight information,
Mhm.
likes that. And I will say more masculine energy here where they're just get straight to the point. And
Mhm.
that's a huge misconception when dealing with women. They think, hey, we don't want to hear, I love that. Just
Mhm.
tell me straight. So I know which way I need to adapt and to move and allow me to get reciprocate with that same energy, right? That energy matches your energy here. So be your authentic self. And also, while doing that, you prepare that junior person to step into those environments, right? Because hopefully you're able to invite them into the room, give them a seat at the table. Maybe they come up with a great idea that can really shift the way that you do business or the experience of your team. Allow them to come in and share that with your peers, share that with the other leaders, and you all co develop what that looks like. They need to be prepared to walk into that meeting. If there's a lot of very type A personalities that are going to give them hard feedback, they're looking for data driven information so that they can create results. They need to be prepared to come into that conversation, and you do them a disservice if you don't set them up for success by being a little too soft because you think that they can't handle it.
I love that you pinned that because it's so critical. The other thing that I said at the beginning, right, is mentorship is a combined word of mentor and relationship, right? So
Absolutely.
you are developing a relationship. You're getting to know each other. You're understanding each other's style. You're understanding each other communications, right? You're figuring out what work, what doesn't. From the junior perspective, you're right. It's all about upskilling and learning how to navigate through those different environments that a senior leader would normally and naturally play in. At the same time, it's also upskilling the senior leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're now understanding that when they send out a message that got to go to the bottom of the organization, not just the top, that they're understanding impact of
Mm-hmm.
their words and their delivery. And that allows them to be more conscious of style switching,
Absolutely.
make sure that they're reaching everyone, right? And that doesn't take away from a leader not being authentic. That shows a conscious leader. That's what that shows, right? That I'm conscious. I understand that there's different people in my organization at different levels that needs something different from me, and I'm willing to give that so that
Mm-hmm.
the message is delivered and is clear, and everyone understands what is now expected based on the direction that you've given and how you've given it. So I get excited about this program because I do believe every organization should have some
Mm-hmm.
level of it, even if it's not a standing committee. It could very well be, like you said, a focus group or a panel,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is called together, and it's the norm in the organization. It's part of our culture that we're about to make some significant change in the organization. And before we do that, we pull together. And I'm being very specific though when I say um, um, junior advisory committee that we are targeting Gen Z and millennials,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is not to exclude Gen X, right? But as the baby boomers move out, the Gen X will move up to that next level. And we are continuing to invest in our future. So let's be intentional about it and let's call out the Gen Zs and the millennials.
Absolutely. And then I will say that there's always an exception to the rule, right? Because sometimes there's a Gen X person who is starting a new career,
Yeah.
right? You see that a lot, people transitioning and doing new careers. So that's a great opportunity to bring them into your advisory committee too. But for the most part, it is the Gen Z, it is the millennial, leverage their fresh perspective and their new way of thinking while training up the next group as well. Now, there's a lot that we do need to take into consideration as we're starting and creating this new mentoring program, right? Not giving away everything, but what are some of those key points that an organization should take into consideration?
So, as we think about establishing a reverse mentoring program, I just wanted to share a few, tips here that maybe can help your organization. And I ask that I know that there's many, out there that have already done this. So we would love to hear, your perspective and experience with this. But the first thing that I would say is make sure the organization is ready to lean into such a program. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, every organization isn't ready to lean in. But I would tell you that if you do that check, because it could create a bad reputation And it could also backfire on you, and you can lose trust when it's not done well, right? The other thing that I would say is ensure that you treat it like any other mentoring program. Because, as you know, we have traditional mentoring programs out there, but it should have a goal. You should be clean on the metrics that says we're meeting this or we're not. And there should be thought going into what that structure would look like. So, chartering that team becomes so important. The other thing is around setting clear expectations for both roles, for the senior leader as well as for the junior leader. And be intentional about matching people up together, right? You're like, oh, I have a senior leader that's very outspoken, and I'm going to put them with Tawana. May not be good. She's outspoken too. They may clash more than sharing ideas, but both must be committed to cultivating a relationship that they themselves can see a win win in this partnership. That there's a high level of respect and a low level for conflict, right? I'm going into this because I'm just going to challenge, as to create disruption versus innovation, right? And that doesn't mean that sometimes disruption is not needed, but not from a conflict perspective, right? But to push the envelope to make sure that we're not settling. All those things make sense. And there is a thin line between that leaders is open to, I'm sorry, I skipped one, create opportunities to learn from each other. That you should already believe going into this process that the junior advisors have something to offer, as well as the senior leaders having something to offer, and that it's something that will excite you, that you're looking forward to this partnership to see what you can learn and glean from it, that the leader is open to different perspectives and experience, right? So it will be an experience because you have someone junior coming in with all the influences that we talked about earlier, and they may not have the entire picture of all the things that go into a decision or a change or but what's important though is that you should be able to create a psychologically safe space, which you hear us talk about all the time, for the mentor to mentee, mentor, to be able to share unflattering things, unflattering information. There should be things that comes out that you like, I had no idea this makes me feel, right? A certain kind of way. I don't want this to exist in my organization. Make those things become a priority, but okay to expose. I would say also share the impact of decisions, actions, and operations at a higher level. So not only should this mentoring mentor relationship just stay between the two of you, as decisions are being made or additional conversations are happening, the rest of the leadership team should know about some of those could be unflattering or flattering things that are occurring in the organization. And here's what this committee is recommending that you do. As far as the junior advisor and mentor, right, you be willing to share diverse experience, thoughts, and ways of doing things. This is so critical because the idea is that we're not doing things as status quo. And you've heard me several times say, think outside the box, be innovative. This is that opportunity, and that those diverse experiences is actually will be what will make the organization better. So share the perspective and offer solutions that positively shift the organization, right? So we think about there could be a process that we've been doing for years, and everyone talk about it behind the scenes as being so painful because there's a story that says senior management loved this process, and oh, by the way, the CEO was one who created it from ground zero up, right? So no one is going to challenge that. But this junior advisory committee or individual should be able to tell you that although you created it, with all due respect, it is one of the most painful processes that we have to use in the organization. It ties up resources, it's not user friendly, And here's another program app, right, that could make everyone's lives better and give more capacity for us to be able to work on some other things. Also exposes the leader to learn more about the business at the grassroots level. So important. So important for the leader to, I would encourage this to all leaders, to look for opportunities to meet your SMEs, your experts in the organization, to understand what they do and how they make things, when you get a report, look so easy and glamorous, but really it's their expertise and how you could potentially make their lives better so that they can do what they do and do it well. And then this is so important that this reverse mentoring also puts the mentor, which is the junior advisor, in the driver's seat. So they should be the ones that's driving the meetings, and the leaders should be open minded to this, right? They're the ones that's coming in based on that initial charter and those initial metrics that you're trying to solve for, but also having some flexibility that new things could come up, right? And you got to deal with the immediate. And mentors has the you got to be willing to lead and know that that's okay. So having these discussions up front, getting a bit of training, all those things are super important to set this up to be a successful program. But let's not forget that first step. Make sure the organization is ready to lean in, because it could create a bad reputation and lose trust if it's not done well.
Thank you for bringing it back to that first bullet and really embracing a culture of coaching and mentoring. It sounds easy, right? But it can be difficult because it requires a mental shift.
Mm-hmm.
It requires you to question your old behaviors, things that worked well for you for a really long time. And now you're saying, hey, what got me here won't get me there. If we're truly going to embrace our people, the diversity, and all the great talent that we've brought on board and made a huge financial investment in and time investment,
Talk
we
about
have
the
to be
return.
willing to listen to them.
Yeah.
They were good enough to be hired. Why would we not take advantage of their thoughts, their skill set, right? So leaning in can look like so many different ways, but the reality is, leaders, it's going to take you to step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's going to take you to say, hey, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And to be vulnerable. That's that V word everyone hates when we bring it up.
Absolutely.
You have to be vulnerable in this process and to say, how can I do it better? Or what changes do I need to make? Or turn that mirror around and look in the face and say, what do I need to do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that takes a little bit of coaching sometimes, and we help with that too. Right. But it's something that we truly believe is how you can get ready for the change now while also taking advantage of your in-house talent and
Mm-hmm.
really using them to make those changes, bring them in, and help you adopt to the new way of doing business. Now, before we go, Tawana, what is one action that you would suggest that people can take now to really step into the right direction of reverse mentoring?
Great question. I would say there's a couple of things actually, but the first is really get a feel for the client, for the climate of the organization, right? How many Gen Zs and millennials do you have in the organization? Because that could be telling too.
Mm.
If there's not many in there, number one. But also, I would say start out with also thinking about a problem
Mhm.
that you would like to solve for, and start out piloting, right? You don't have to just jump into a full-fledged a reverse mentoring program. We can pilot a problem, right?
Mhm.
That we would love to get their perspective on. You can start with some of those questions that we pose around their thinking. And there could be a few leaders that you would want to go through that program with them and set a timeline for that. And that's how I would start it out. I wouldn't necessarily just jump right in because it's actually going to evolve over time
Mhm.
and as the need of the organization change. So that's what I would say would be the way I would think about it. But make sure that the organization is ready, right?
Mhm.
And organization meaning leaders, because
Right.
that is important.
That is important. I love that you talked about a pilot. I
Yeah.
love a pilot, right? Because that's an opportunity to test your theory. It's an opportunity to make some tweaks before you roll it out across the board. My one thing would be to start now by if you already have some type of connection with someone who falls into that Gen Z or that millennial category, set up a one-on-one and start having these conversations now. You don't have to wait until the pilot or the full program comes about. You can take the initiative and start the conversations now, leveraging your current people. I would challenge you to not just go to the people that you typically go to,
Yeah.
right? Go
Love
to
that.
someone that you don't always get their input or isn't so willing to raise their hand.
Mhm.
Use this as an opportunity to start a new relationship with someone.
Latanya, one of the things that I missed, and when you said that, it was like, ding, which
Mhm.
is have a written selection process.
Yes.
How could I miss that? Oh my gosh, this is so important, right? We have to have a selection process for who would start out in this program. What is the criteria, the expectation? I talked about expectation, but I did not talk about, criteria for selecting.
Mhm.
And they should be diverse in every way you can possibly think about as you think about your organization. Okay. So just one nugget there. I'll leave it there, just looking at our time.
No, thank you. No, that's so important to have a selection criteria, anything that you do, that charter that you mentioned earlier, right?
Absolutely.
That needs to be a part of it. So thank you all for joining us today for Live with OIB. You know where you can find us if you want to hear more information about our services. We'd love to have a consultation with you. You can visit us at www.oaib.org. And that's where you can go ahead and check us out, see what we have to offer. You can set up that consultation with us. Love to hear what you're thinking about today's session. Leave us a comment below, any additional questions you may have, or topics that you want to hear about in the future. We're always going back to see what new and fresh information we can bring to you all um, every other week of the month. As you know, we're here every first and third Tuesday. On the first Tuesday of the month, or excuse me, on the third Tuesday of the month, just like today, you stay to the end, you actually receive a code for SHRM professional development credits. And so OAIB is approved by SHRM to offer PDCs for the SHRM CP and the SHRM SCP. This session has been approved for one PDC. You can claim recertification credit with program code 23-2KQAE. Again, that's 23-2, K as in kite, Q as in quilt, A as in apple, E as in Edward. It is important that you keep track of the session that you view, as OIB will not be able to provide you with a record of the session you've attended. All right. If you found value in this, go and tell a friend, tell another friend, and tell another friend to come back and check us out. Join us again next month on the first Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you then.
Thank you.